Hey there, Amanda from the Happy Homestead here. We just got back from the Homesteaders of America conference, so I'm proudly, you can see it, proudly wearing my shirt. It was so amazing. It was in Front Royal, Virginia. We're in the middle of October now, and so we just got back, and it was so great. It was so great to be around all the like-minded people and to be re-inspired with things. And I came home with so many ideas of things we want to do. But you have to take it step by step, right? So today I'm going to show you something that you can do no matter where you live. If you live in an apartment or you live on a 100-acre farm, it doesn't matter. You can make your own sourdough bread, your own sourdough sandwich bread. And that's what I do every week. And so I thought I'd show you how we do this so that you can start it yourself. So this is my sourdough starter. I just took this out of the refrigerator. When I'm not actively using it, like letting it rise and ferment, it's kept in the fridge with a lid. And then I just have a rubber band on it so that way I can easily tell how much it's risen. It's a foolproof way to know if your sourdough starter is pretty active and it's ready to go. I do this once a week, like I said, and I am down to this much left. So there's not too much left. And so sourdough bread, doesn't matter if it's a sandwich loaf or a boule or an artisan loaf, it takes a little bit of forethought. It's not a hard process. It's not a long process as far as hands-on, but it does take some time that you just have to have some planning ahead. So I feed my sourdough starter on one day, right? On day one, that's today. And then I will mix it in with some of the flour and get actually the dough going later today. And then I let it bulk ferment overnight in the refrigerator. And then it gets baked tomorrow. So you can't say, "Oh, I'm running out of bread," and then expect to bake that bread the same exact day. It does take one day in advance, so kind of keep that in mind. So what we're gonna do is feed this. You can go online and search, and there's tons of options to buy your own sourdough starter, but you don't have to. I did not. I actually made this about 1.5 years ago. You can capture all of the wild yeasts in the air in your own kitchen, in your own home, and create your own sourdough starter. So what you'll do is you'll mix equal parts of flour. I would recommend starting with all-purpose flour and water, and I use like a filtered water or a well water. I try to stay away from the city water just because there's other stuff in there that could affect the bacteria. So equal parts flour, equal parts water. So I try to do things by weight, and so I always have a kitchen scale on hand, and you'll see me do that when I'm feeding my starter today. But you could do, say, 30 grams of water, 30 grams of flour. Mix it up and give it a breathable top. So put it in like a glass jar, and then I put just like a piece of fabric on it with a canning ring so it breathes. And you're gonna do that for about 7 days or so. But then on day 2, you're gonna take half of it away and add equal parts in again. 3rd day, take half of it away, add equal parts in again. And you're doing this process repetitively. And what you're doing is you're allowing those yeasts to come in and to start eating and feeding and building and growing. And really by the end of the week, you're gonna have your own sourdough starter. It works, trust me, but you can also go buy some. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is take this lid off, and I'm gonna take some of this out, and I have a container of where I keep, it's called the discard. Don't throw your discard away. There's so many things you can do with that, and I'll do another video with that next time. But I'm going to take some of my starter away and just put it in here and add it to this. And usually when I have a cup or two is when then I go and I make some sourdough pancakes or waffles, and then you're set. So let's get started with taking half away and then adding equal parts flour and water. All right, so I'm not measuring anything. I'm literally just taking a spoon and taking some out. Okay, that's good. You can see there's still some in there. It's not a whole lot, but it's enough. And the reason you do that, the reason you want to do the discard is to really help give the bacteria fresh everything to feed on. So I tared, my scale's at 0. I'm just gonna tare it. It doesn't really matter to me what's already in here. Okay, tare it again. And now I'm going to add equal amounts. I'm probably gonna do 50 grams each. Now, when I was first creating my own starter, I was doing like whole wheat flour. And I have to tell you, I had the hardest time. I don't remember exactly what flour it was, but it was not all purpose. And I was having the hardest time getting my starter to really grow. And then I switched to all-purpose and it was overnight. And I was like, oh my goodness, what have I been doing wrong? All right, so this says 50. So I've got 50 grams of all-purpose flour. And I'm gonna very slowly and carefully add 50 grams of water. You go slowly because you can't really take the water out as easily if you go overboard. And okay, we're at 100. If you're off by 1 gram or so, do not panic. Don't worry about it. Okay. I am just gonna mix everything together. I'm gonna get it really incorporated in here. I like to take my spoon and like take it along the side to get everything. The amazing thing about learning how to do sourdough bread is you never have to buy yeast. If you remember during the pandemic, yeast was one of those things that was actually hard to find, like instant yeast. And so if you have a sourdough starter that's always in your fridge and that you're, keeping healthy, you will never have to worry about buying yeast again. And it's just healthier for you. Okay, so everything is fully mixed in. I'm gonna put my fabric on and my canning ring. This is just to keep any bugs out, right? But let the yeast breathe. And so now what I'm doing is I am putting my rubber band at the level. You can't maybe see that very well, but this is just some on the side. The level of the actual starter is right around here. And so I'm just gonna put that on the counter, and then when we come back, it's gonna have risen at least by double. So you want to set it in a semi-warm place. It doesn't, you're not gonna put it on a hot stove, but if you had your stove on or your oven on, and the stove is now cooling, right, or the oven is on and it's just putting off a little heat, sometimes I put it on top of my glass stove just to kind of jumpstart it, or maybe I'll put it in the window if it's a really warm, sunny day. Mid-October now, zone 7B, it's probably 65 to 70 degrees outside, so it's not warm, but it's not cool. It may take a little longer, so just keep in mind with where you are, the time of year, if you're trying to feed your sourdough, on how long it could take. In the summer, it's not going to take nearly as long as it would in the winter. But you're looking for that to double, to really rise and to double in nature. And once it's doubled, we're ready for the next step. So that's it for right now. And I didn't even stop the camera. I think that took about 7 minutes. And that's it. And so now I go about my day and we'll come back and we'll create our dough once that is risen. So it's been about 4.5 hours. I just wanted to show you where we're at. We're not quite doubled yet, but it is certainly growing. You can kind of see some of those bigger bubbles in there. So I'm gonna let this go for a couple more hours. But in the meantime, I'm going to grind my grains. I have a Mock Mill 100 grain grinder, and that's what I use for all of our flours. We have all-purpose flour on hand, but everything else I grind on demand. Now, you don't need a grain grinder. You don't have to grind on demand. You do need a really good bread flour though. So a bread flour is going to be like a hard red wheat or a hard white wheat. They have a higher instance of protein and gluten to really create that structure for your sandwich loaf. So make sure you're purchasing a really good bread flour. I am gonna go with hard white wheat today. This is what I have. We buy our grains from Azure Standard, and that's what I'm going to measure out and get ground. So again, any really good recipe that involves baking, because baking is a science, it's not cooking, goes by weight. So I try to stay away from recipes that'll say 1 cup this, half a cup of that, especially when it comes to bread making, and even cakes, because really you need to have good measurements. And so I always try to do things by weight. So I use my scale. And so the master recipe that I'm using, I will put down in the show notes, but it's 500 grams of flour, 350 grams of water, anywhere between 5 and 8 grams of sea salt. And then I do about 60 to 75 grams of my sourdough starter. It varies within that realm. But that's what we're going to do. So I am going to get the mock mill started and grind out 500 grams of my hard white wheat flour. Now, again, if you are not grinding your grains, do not stress about this part. You're literally skipping it and you're just measuring out 500 grams of flour. Okay, we're at 517. This is what it looks like, 517 grams. So the question is going to be, am I going to take out that extra 17 or leave it? I'm going to leave it. I'm okay. While you want to use measurements because you get a more precise amount, I'm really not going to stress over it. The other reason for that is probably because I've done this before. I've been making our own sandwich bread for 1.5 years now. Side note, we haven't bought bread in 1.5 years. Think about that. That's pretty exciting to me. I love it. So I'm not too worried about it because I've got experience kind of going through this recipe. But for your first time, try to get it as close to 500 as possible. And so, especially if you're not grinding your own flour, it's pretty easy. You can get exact, put whatever's left back in your package and store it. But because I ground this, I'm just leaving it. It's not a big deal. Again, I used hard white wheat. You're looking for a bread flour. So you could use an all-purpose flour. You can. I wouldn't really recommend it though. Number one, nutritionally, it's not going to give you the most qualitative product. And then also structurally, it may not come out the way you're hoping. The other thing we're going to add, like I had mentioned, is salt. I just add pink Himalayan sea salt. I haven't done that yet, but it's just salt, the water, and the starter. That's it. So next time you're in the store and you're in the bread aisle, I want you to turn over a package and look at all of those ingredients. Seriously, I want you to read them, because when you think about what we're doing here, we've got our starter, our sourdough starter, which is just flour and water, right? And then the natural cultures, the natural yeast, water, salt, flour, and that's it. How to think about it. It's your sourdough starter, water, salt, flour. It's 4 ingredients in your bread. So that's why I want you to try this. It's a cost effective too. You don't need, like I said, a mock mill. You don't need special equipment. Okay, so now that the flour is ready, like I said, I'm going to give my sourdough starter another hour or 2. We'll come back, take a look at it, and then we'll go to the next step. It's been 5.5 hours since we first fed our sourdough starter. I wanted to show you, hopefully that's a good, there you go. So you can see it's pretty much doubled, right? And that's why you put the rubber band there, so you can actually see how much it's grown. It's such an easy hack. And so yeah, it's doubled. It's good enough for me. So we are now gonna mix up our dough. So remember, we've got our flour, 500 grams of strong bread flour already going. Obviously, we've got our sourdough. I've got some pink Himalayan sea salt that I'm gonna add in. And then I've already measured out 350 grams of filtered water. Remember, you wanna tare your scale to 0 after you put your empty measuring cup on, right? Put your measuring cup on, tare it, and then measure out your water to 350 grams. So now we're gonna mix this all together. So I have my scale here only because I'm just gonna do the salt. So I'm gonna put this on, tare it to 0, and I do about 5 grams. There we go. So I don't want it too salty, but I want some flavor. Okay, actually before I mix this all in, what you wanna do now, so I have my water, right? My 350 grams of water. I'm tearing this back to 0. And now I'm gonna add anywhere between 60 and 75 grams of sourdough starter. And you wanna mix it with the water so that it can really mix around evenly, so when you come in here, you don't have some clumps. So, do this where you can see this better. So we're at 30, 40, 50. And again, you're mixing it within the water, so it just evenly mixes in here a lot easier. Let's bring this over. And now, pour it all in. So you want to make sure you have a bowl that's big enough to do all this, right? And now all I'm doing is mixing. So it is about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm gonna let this sit for probably an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then I'm gonna do my first set of pulls, and I'll show you what that looks like. And all you're doing is just kind of pulling the dough to help activate this, the yeast, the cultures. So it's kind of mixed in, but now I'm gonna use my hand and really get into a good ball here. So you can see why you want to start with feeding your sourdough in the morning. It's kind of the first thing I do in the morning. Just take it out of the fridge, feed it, and leave it be, go about my day. And then in the afternoon, I will go ahead and get my flour measured out, and then, you know, put my dough together. And so you're gonna let this sit. You're gonna do a few different sets of pulls, and then you let it sit and bulk ferment overnight. So that's it. And so now what I'm gonna do is, I've got this bees wrap. It's really just a piece of fabric that's been kind of painted with some beeswax. And I'm just gonna put it over it and leave it on the counter like this. So again, we're gonna leave this on the counter for about an hour and a half, and then we'll do our first set of pulls. So now you have your starter. I'm just gonna, you can see it's kind of all over the sides there. I'm just gonna push it back down. I do this for a couple of reasons. First, because I'm OCD and I like to have a clean side of my jar. I can't stand the dirtiest of the side of the jar. But it's not just OCD. It's also because that's really good sourdough starter in there. And if you leave it on the side of the jar like that and put it in the fridge, it will probably dry out and become a crusty mess. So I do it to save it, but also So now I can easily kind of see where my starter is. So notice how this is where we originally were after we fed, and now we're back down to a half of that. So what I'm gonna do is put my lid that I had originally this morning back on and put this in the fridge. I will not feed it again. I will not take half away until I'm ready to make my next loaf in about a week. And then I'll start this process all over. I'll take it out of the fridge, take some of it away and put it in that extra container, feed it, put on the fabric and the ring to let it breathe, let it ferment, and then go forward. So this is gonna go in the fridge. You can have your snacks right there. Okay, that's all I got.
Can I have a whole apple?
You have apples right there.
No, I want a whole apple.
Yeah, sure. It has been an hour and a half since we mixed our dough. I wouldn't really say it's changed too much in how it looks, but we're gonna go ahead and do our first set of pulls. All right, so all I'm doing is pulling from the edge and folding over. And I'm just moving the bowl around and doing that the whole way. And sometimes I pick it up to kind of get some leverage, and I just keep folding over. And I'll do this with about 2 or 3 rotations. And that's it. And then you leave it and cover it back up. And we'll wait about another hour, hour and a half, and do our next set of pulls. It's been an hour and a half. It's getting towards the end of the day. My family's home. My patience is running thin, but we're gonna do the bread. So it hasn't changed too much, but we're gonna do our next set of pulls. It's getting more pliable. You'll notice over time that, you know, things are coming together a lot better. Like it feels really soft and yummy. Yummy's the best word I can think of. Okay. That is good for now. I need to feed my family dinner. We'll leave this. It is 6:30, so I will do another set of pulls between 7:30 and 8, so another hour to an hour and a half. It is 8 o'clock at night. I'm tired. My kids are thankfully in bed. The last hour and a half was a crazy circus marathon. Anyway. This is just like, you know, I'm thinking about this, and yes, sourdough is a commitment. This is not hard. So I do not want you to walk away from this thinking, gosh, that took a lot of time. It really doesn't take a lot of time, but it is a commitment. And I guess thinking about it, anything that's worthwhile and anything that's good for you, it's a commitment, right? Sourdough's that way too. All right, so we're gonna go for our third pull. It is expanded a little bit, and you'll start noticing towards that third and fourth pull that it has grown a bit. You want it to, that's the point. So I am gonna do a pull. I will probably do one more pull, and I'll show it to you, one more pull after this. And then we're gonna put it in our loaf pan for the bulk ferment. So let's get this done. Still feels wonderfully soft and pliable. Okay. For this one, I'm actually just gonna flip it over like this. For no other reason other than you might be able to see it grow a little bit better when we do our fourth pull. All right, cover up. So at this point, I'm probably gonna wait until 9:30, do my last pull, and put it into the loaf pan. So yeah, I got an hour and a half to just zen until this is the next pull. See you soon. It's 9:30. I'm looking at myself in the camera. I look a little different than I did 12 hours ago when we began this venture. This is real life, folks. Okay, so this is the last pull of the night. It's grown a little bit. Again, that's what you want to see. It's not going to double by any means in that time, but it is going to grow. So up until this point, there really hasn't been any huge expenditure of money, right, for making your own sourdough bread. I mean, granted, you can go buy your own sourdough starter, or you could make your own. And I didn't even mention, you could also just find a friend who already has their own sourdough starter and just get some from them. And that way you can start even quicker too. So, and then you're using a bread flour, not that much more money than maybe an organic all-purpose flour. So what, maybe $6 or $7 for that. And that's it, right? So this so far has been a pretty cost-effective venture to start. Now, I do want to mention I have a pan. This was not an expensive pan, so I wasn't like leading up to something. I'll put it down in the show notes what it is. It doesn't say anything other than USA pan in it, but this has what I use to make our sandwich loaf. And I have gone through a traditional just non-stick loaf pan. That didn't work. And then I did a silicone loaf pan thinking silicone would work, and it kind of went out rather than up. And so I got rid of those. And then I found this through some searching on Amazon and just from other people. And this has turned out to be the best. It's the best conductor of the heat evenly. It also has these ridges in it, if you can see, which really help release the loaf. And so it's not really sticking. Now, I am gonna drizzle some olive oil. I do very little, and I just take my hand and spread it through and then put the dough in. So if you're going to start making your own sandwich loaf regularly, as I do for the last year and a half, invest in a really good loaf pan. Okay, so we are going to do another set of pulls, and then I'm actually going to shape it, right? When we did our pulls before, it was still in that circular dough ball. We're actually gonna do our pulls and shape it in a more rectangular shape to put it into our loaf pan. All right, first I'm just gonna add some olive oil. So not much there. And I'm literally just taking my fingers. I'm making sure I get all of the corners. It's not so much the sides or the bottom of where I find things stick, right? It's those corners. And this is not gonna add much flavor. You could use a coconut oil if you would rather that, or an avocado oil. I just use a pretty mild olive oil. And that's it. All right, so let's do our pull. Okay, so normally that would be enough. And all I'm gonna do now is just kind of still creating the tension, right? That pulling tension on the top here. I'm just kind of putting everything, like kind of like tightening up the top. That's all I'm doing. And it does, it creates that beautiful tension for the top of the loaf. And then I'm just gonna put it in there. And I am still going to cover it in my bees wrap here. And I'm gonna actually proof this in the fridge. So when I put this in the fridge though, I am not going to put this on like super tight, right? I'm actually going to try to tent it a little bit so that as the dough rises, it's not sticking to the bees wrap. Okay, so this is what it will look like in the fridge. And I am going to proof this or bulk ferment this in the refrigerator. Now, I've been doing this a while and I have had plenty of mishaps. And I think the biggest thing I did was I would bulk ferment it or proof it just out here on my counter overnight. And so then by the time the morning came and I was ready to bake, it was overproofed. So, and you kind of know that just from experience, but one of the ways I was able to tell is that it wasn't really rising and holding its structure. It would rise, hold its structure, and then it would start falling and spreading. And that's how you know your dough is kind of overproofed. It doesn't taste bad, but it doesn't look as pretty. You don't get those sourdough holes. And so you kind of, that's one of the biggest pitfalls with sourdough is just overproofing it. And so I get around that now by putting it in the refrigerator overnight to do the bulk ferment and the bulk proof. And then in the morning, I will literally just open the fridge and kind of like peek in here and see how much has it risen. Usually when it's just peeking over the edge of the pan is when I know it's time to put it in the oven. So I'll check it in the morning, and if it's not even near the top, I will actually take it out and put it on the counter just for a couple of hours, right? Keep an eye on it, but put it on the counter for a couple of hours and then bake it. So we'll see how that looks tomorrow morning though. I'm going to bed. I'm putting this to bed in the fridge and I'm going to bed. So I will see you in the morning. Good morning. It's the next morning. It is almost 8 a.m. So the dough has been proofing in the fridge for about 10 and a half hours. I'm going to take it out and see what it looks like. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. I'm going to take this off. I don't expect it to have risen much, and that's okay, because again, I didn't want it to overproof. Yeah, it doesn't really look like it did much. So I'm going to leave this, I'm going to cover it back up, but I'm going to leave it on the counter and let it proof for probably 3 to 4 hours. And then around lunchtime, we'll check again. Between 11 and 12, we'll check again. But don't get dismayed by that, right? You do not want it to overproof. If I had left it out on the counter, it's possible it could have. So that's why you want to judge it within your kitchen temperature, the outside temperature, time of year, right? It's better to be safe than sorry. So I'm going to cover this back up, get it back on the counter, and go about my day. See you in a little bit. It's 1 o'clock and it's ready to go in the oven. So actually, before I show it to you, I am going to preheat my oven to 450. It's gonna go on the middle rack, so I was just checking to make sure there was nothing on the middle rack. But yeah, you're gonna preheat your oven to 450, and it's a little bit above the rim of the pan. So it looks great. It is absolutely ready to get in the oven. So once that beeps and it's preheated, I am gonna stick it in the oven. I am gonna cook that, I cook it at 450 for about 40 to 45 minutes. I usually start with 40. And then if it's really, it'll get like a really beautiful deep brown. And I just don't want it to burn, right? So I go between 40 and 45, but I start looking at it at 40. But by 45, I take it out and I let it cool. So once this is preheated, I'm gonna put it in the oven and I'm gonna start with 40 minutes. Hallelujah! Our bread is done. I feel like I do this weekly, right? But putting it on camera, it feels like it has gone on forever. Let's pull this out. Yeah. I'm gonna pull this out. So what I'm gonna do is actually take it out of the pan and let it cool on a rack. So let me show you what that's gonna look like. And it comes out literally right without any issues. It's the easiest thing ever with that pan. So it's perfect. I mean, it's beautiful. And you can see like there's a little give in there. So it's nice and soft on the inside, but it is got a beautiful crust. Obviously, I'm not cutting this open right now. It really does need to cool for a few hours. It's 2 o'clock, so maybe we'll cut a piece open in a few hours for dinner. Otherwise, I'll just leave it till the morning for breakfast for the kids. The last thing I did want to show you though, is you're gonna want a really good serrated knife. I call it, this is actually a bread knife. It's a high carbon, no stainless steel, really sharp serrated knife. And this is what I use to slice our bread. We don't have a bread slicer. Who does? You just need a really good knife. And so all we do is slice off what we need. If I need 2 pieces in the morning, I slice off 2 pieces. I would not recommend just slicing the entire loaf into multiple slices unless you're using all of those slices at that time. I store it on the counter, like maybe in a Ziploc bag, but the bag is not completely sealed, right? I do let some airflow. And if I feel like it's been too long on the counter, I'll put it in the fridge, like the one I have now is in the fridge. But I've never had issues with mold. I've never had issues with it going stale. I mean, we eat it literally within a week. So, happy bread making. Thank you so much for going along this journey with me. Let me know if you try it. I hope you do, but I'd love to hear your questions, your input, and your success. Stay healthy, stay well. See you next time.